COVID-19 coverage ensues, and we've seen loss yesterday. In fact, President Cyril Ramaphosa responded to requests by the Gauteng Liquor Forum to lift the country's alcohol ban. Alcohol traders will have to wait until the end of the nationwide lockdown to resume trade. State Attorney acting for President Cyril Ramaphosa emphasized on Friday that the sale of alcohol is not deemed as an essential service. Also unpack this and chat further, economist Ndumiso Hadebe, who joins us via Skype. Good morning, Ndumiso. Thank you very much for joining us. I just want to look at the value chain of the alcohol industry. I mean, beyond the sale of alcohol, we've seen the tourism sector impacted, as well as employment and earnings to date. Just walk us through what that value chain looks like.
So in essence, as per the 2019 medium-term budget policy statement, alcohol in the form of beer, wine and spirits contributed in excess of 25 billion rand to our fiscus. And particularly when we look at, for instance, the wine industry, a number of wine products are exported to the European and to the US market. So we do derive a lot of foreign exchange reserves, which makes our balance of payments be buoyant in that respect. But also within the overall alcohol industry, there's also distributors, there are also wine and alcohol makers as well. Then at the end of that value chain, you have the guys who are selling it from a retail perspective, and there's also a growing craft beer market in the South African alcohol industry as well. So it's diversified in that instance, and they do contribute indeed to that excess of 25 billion rand as it last year.
What is the direct impact of this ban on the sector, particularly pertaining to small businesses?
Well, I think like many industries, this particular lockdown has had significant impact from an economic perspective. In our own modeling, we've seen that the contraction that we anticipate for 2020 is at least 3%. And it's like that for many industries. But I think alcohol, it's not only the debate or the view of its impact on just an economic perspective, but it's also the social cost with respect to the continued ban on the alcohol industry, because it's the trade-off therein to say, what is the correlation between excessive alcohol consumption with other social behaviors such as crime, gender-based violence, and so on and so forth. So that's where I think even with this particular ban and the president being very decisive in stating that it is not an essential service, that those are some of the considerations that he had to consider in terms of what is the total contribution of alcohol to the South African economy and South African society.
Ndumiso, on that note, walk us through what government's, factors rather influencing government's decision to maintain the ban of alcohol.
On the one side, it is the question to say, if the state was to approve the sale of alcohol during the lockdown, what precedent would that present for other industries as well, such as the manufacturing sector? We know the mining industry as well has stated that they cannot operate. It's not profitable for them to operate at 50% capacity. As China's manufacturing industry is starting to operate once more, there's increased demand from mining houses. There's also sectors such as tourism and traveling and foreign direct investment. So it raises contentious issues to say, if the alcohol industry was to be permitted to continue with their sale, what is the implication for other industries during this period of the lockdown? Secondly, there are also the implications, as the Minister of Police, Minister Liezle, had stated with respect to the indicators for crime statistics in South Africa, that there have been some reductions in terms of key crime indicators in South Africa over the period of the lockdown, and consequently we're able to see the correlation between when people act or behave under the influence of alcohol and the social behaviors that are implicated in that respect. And when you look at it within the context of the lockdown, you would not want a kind of behavior that would permeate to ensure that there's high transmission potential with respect to the COVID-19 pandemic. So those are all of the considerations that the state had to take into consideration with respect to this particular decision.
What does this ultimately mean for consumers and perhaps even those who are worried about the impact of people who have some form of liquor dependency, the hard drinkers, even alcoholics?
I think this particular instance, it reveals a number of social issues that we need to address in South Africa. And part of it are more social and psychological, to say what then informs the overdependency of people towards alcohol. It can be many things. It can be domestic related issues, but it can also be related to issues such as the high levels of unemployment and inequality in South African society, and some of the structural issues that continue to have a negative impact and disproportionately affect the poor. When we look at Status A data, we even find that where the poorer segmentation in South African economy in terms of the groceries and the purchases that they make, alcohol tends to be quite a popular mix in terms of where they spend their rands and cents. And that can be attributed to a number of mental health issues, depression, and so on and so forth. So ultimately, I do think that South Africa then does need to ensure that we address the ongoing unemployment issue, address the inequalities that we have in terms of income and wealth inequality in South Africa, and overall structural bottlenecks that impede overall prosperity for all South Africans, to ensure that South Africans are not overly dependent on alcohol, but also to ensure that for those that are, we do have institutions that are able to give them the requisite support in order to ensure that they overcome the dependency that some South Africans might have on alcohol.
Ndumiso, let's look at that. I remember the forum's lawyer, Eric Mabuza, arguing, and I'm going to quote, it says that his client's odds were worsened by the fact that they could not qualify for any of the financial relief offered by the state to small businesses. As we know that there is a debt relief fund, a tourism fund that also has been set up. We've seen the Rand's performance dipping. We've seen Moody's and Fitch rating also coming through. I mean, looking at the impact, the state of the economy at home, I mean, what options are available for those who do require assistance until the lockdown period ends and perhaps even recovery thereafter?
Well, I think the options are certainly quite limited, given that South Africa's fiscal resources are also quite limited. And I think in addition to that, it increasingly places the need for a capable development state to be something that needs to be present as of today, as stated by the President in his State of the Nation address. And this, we, for instance, would look at the role of the Unemployment Insurance Fund. A number of business owners and a number of workers during this time are looking or have been attempting to claim or make their claims with respect to the Unemployment Insurance Fund over this period. And some of them have faced challenges around the inaccessibility of the platform of the Uninsurance Fund online, be it because of digital means or otherwise, and also given that there's also this existing lockdown. So even some of the interventions that the state may want to transfer with respect to the claims that are being made over this period, it presents a number of challenges for them to have access to that. Secondly, if we were to look at the innovative measures that folks in this particular segmentation may attempt to pursue, their options are quite limited because indeed, again, we are in a lockdown, as it were. So what this particular situation emphasizes is increasingly the need for the state to build capacity to ensure that the institutions, the instruments, and the mechanisms that we have available does indeed and is indeed accessible to all South Africans in events of such a pandemic.
Ndumiso, government ultimately will not benefit, let's say, from the increase in tax as announced by the Minister of Finance back in February during the budget speech. I'm looking at the response by South Africans. I mean, how do you think South Africans will ultimately respond? I mean, does this even open the doors for more illicit trade? What is the reality on the ground?
You're quite correct. In such instances, when there are instances of economic decline, we not only see increases in economic trade, we also see increases in events of cybercrime and fraud crime. As number one, folks are unable to transact as they usually do on a face-to-face basis, so oftentimes they lead to online. But as well, you find folks who are very desperate to generate and earn an income that do develop scams to be able to scam people online as well. You do find instances as well that even during the lockdown, that certain traders do continue to trade, but try to attempt and to ensure that they are not found by the authorities as a consequence of this. And this is purely a behavioral issue when it comes to the survival of individuals, particularly when you have an instance where over 50% of South Africans earn below the upper poverty breadline of 900 rands per person per month. And oftentimes, that category of South Africans are reliant on social grants. And we would know that indeed social grants as an intervention by the state addresses the question of chronic poverty for at least 3 million South Africans. So indeed, we would see an increase in a number of online crimes and also illicit trading over this period. And unfortunately, then the social balance over this lockdown, or the trade-off, as it were, becomes quite difficult, and it requires the authorities to be vigilant in that respect to protect South Africans who might be victims of such crime and illicit trading. But also the trade-off of South Africans needing to survive as well in this instance is quite evidently going to lead to some of these illicit events taking place.
Ndumiso Hadebe, thank you very much for joining us this morning on Newzroom Afrika. Here's